History books love to talk about genius strategy and iron will. Tonight, we cover the other stuff: the toilet that sank a warship, the bench that saved a president, and the bear that nearly ended civilization. 10 moments when the fate of nations came down to sheer dumb luck. Stick around. In number 10, the villain confirms his own crime at a press conference. April 1945. The Third Reich has about 2 weeks left to live, and somewhere off the coast of Scotland, submarine U-1206 is about to make naval history in the least dignified way possible. This late-war U-boat came equipped with the pride of German engineering, a high-pressure deep-water toilet that could flush against the ocean itself, even at combat depth. The catch? Operating it was so complicated that the crew included specialists trained specifically in the art of flushing. Let that settle in. Nazi Germany was collapsing on every front, but every one of these boats carried a certified toilet technician. Priorities. Enter Captain Karl Adolf Schlitt, 27 years old, on his very first combat patrol. According to one version of events, the version absolutely everyone prefers, the captain decided he didn't need a specialist for a procedure he'd been performing successfully since age 3 and worked the valves himself. When things went audibly wrong, the trained flush engineer rushed in to save the day and opened the wrong valve. The Atlantic Ocean, which had been waiting patiently on the other side of the hull, accepted the invitation. Seawater poured down into the battery compartment, located directly beneath the bathroom. Because of course it was. And batteries plus salt water produce chlorine gas. With his crew choking on poison of their own manufacture, Schlitt had no option but an emergency surface. Straight into the view of British patrol aircraft, who bombed the boat on sight. Schlitt ordered her scuttled. 3 men drowned in the heavy seas, and 46 marched off to prison camp. And that is how U-1206 became the only warship in history lost to its own toilet. Not to depth charges, not to a destroyer, to plumbing. The captain survived the war, by the way, and then had to spend the rest of his life telling this story at parties, watching people's faces travel from disbelief to joy. There are worse punishments than captivity. Somewhere, every engineer who ever said keep it simple is still doing one long, slow, deeply satisfied nod. October 25th, 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis is at full boil. American air defense is sitting at DEFCON3, and everyone with a launch key is one bad phone call away from ending the 20th century ahead of schedule. Around midnight, a sentry at a base in Duluth, Minnesota, spots a dark figure climbing the security fence. A Soviet saboteur. What else could it be, this week of all weeks? He opens fire and hits the sabotage alarm, which automatically triggers alarms at every airbase in the region. So far, so procedural. Now for the wiring. At Volk Field, Wisconsin, the alarm system had been installed in a hurry. Because when nuclear war is on the calendar, nobody double-checks the electrician's homework. Someone had crossed the wires. Instead of the sabotage warning, the base got the klaxon that means exactly one thing. The war has started. Scramble now. And the pilots believed it, because they had been explicitly told there would be no drills. 106 interceptors armed with Genie nuclear air-to-air missiles taxied toward the runway, flown by men who sincerely thought civilization had just ended, and they were the closing act. The only reason it stopped? Somebody at the command post finally reached Duluth by phone and heard the words, "What nuclear order?" An officer jumped into a truck, floored it down the active runway with lights flashing, and physically cut off armed nuclear interceptors like a soccer mom late for practice. The jets stood down. The paperwork, one assumes, took longer. And the Soviet saboteur back in Duluth? A black bear, climbing a fence, looking for dinner. Think about the chain for a second. One hungry animal, one jumpy sentry, one lazy wiring job, and nuclear-armed jets rolling for takeoff in the middle of the tensest week in human history. Somewhere in the Minnesota woods lived the single most geopolitically significant animal of the Cold War, and it died of old age, never knowing it once had the entire planet by the throat. The wiring got fixed, we're told, presumably by a different electrician, hopefully after a background check. 2 days after the bear, October 27th, 1962, the genuinely worst day of the Cold War. In the Sargasso Sea, Soviet submarine B-59 is being hunted by 11 American destroyers and an aircraft carrier. The Americans are dropping signal depth charges, practice explosives that politely mean surface and identify yourself. Minor technical detail. Nobody had told the crew of B-59 about that vocabulary lesson. From inside a steel tube, a polite explosion sounds exactly like an impolite one. Picture the scene below. The boat has been submerged too long to catch radio traffic, so for all they know, the war has already started. The air conditioning is dead, the temperature is passed. 45 Celsius, carbon dioxide is climbing, the batteries are dying, and the hull rings like a church bell with every blast. Captain Savitsky, cooked, deaf, and cut off from the world, reaches the reasonable conclusion that World War III is happening upstairs, and orders the special weapon prepared, a nuclear torpedo, which, small footnote, the Americans didn't even know was on board. On any other submarine in that flotilla, launch required 2 signatures, captain and political officer. Both said yes. But B-59, by pure administrative accident, happened to be carrying the flotilla chief of staff, Vasily Arkhipov, and his presence meant this one boat, alone in the entire ocean, needed a third signature. The third man said no. Arkhipov pointed out that the charges were landing beside the hull, never on it. A hunter who wants you dead doesn't keep missing on purpose. He talked the captain down. The boat surfaced. Everyone went home and did not have a nuclear war. Kennedy and Khrushchev got the history books, the movies, and the memorials. The man who actually saved the world got a quiet career, a modest pension, and 40 years of total obscurity. The story only surfaced decades later. Do the math on this one? Your entire existence, everyone you have ever met, and every video on this platform currently depend on one exhausted officer having been assigned, by paperwork, to the correct submarine. Feel free to say thank you at your convenience. He can't hear you, but the universe appreciates the gesture. February 15th, 1933. Miami. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, president-elect, 17 days from inauguration, has just finished a short speech from the back seat of an open car. In the crowd stands Giuseppe Zangara, an unemployed bricklayer with a $5 revolver, chronic stomach pain, a burning grudge against capitalists, and one tactical problem he'd somehow overlooked. He was 5 feet tall, in a standing crowd, at night. Unable to see his target, Zangara improvised. He climbed onto a wobbly folding chair, which was already occupied territory, since a housewife named Lillian Cross was standing on it for a better view. Yes, the assassination of the century's most consequential president was attempted from shared furniture. What followed was the least professional attempt on a head of state in American history. A small, furious man teetering on shaky legs, the chair's and his own, trying to aim over a sea of hats, while everything rocked beneath him, and Mrs. Cross, grasping the situation instantly, seized his gun arm and wrenched it toward the sky. All 5 bullets missed Roosevelt. Every single one, from 25 feet away. One of them, tragically, struck Anton Cermak, the mayor of Chicago, standing by FDR's car. He died 3 weeks later, and out of respect, the jokes will steer around him. Zangara pleaded guilty and went to the electric chair barely 5 weeks after pulling the trigger. The 1933 justice system did not believe in waiting lists. Now, zoom out. If that chair stands steady, if Mrs. Cross picks a different spot in the crowd, there is no Roosevelt presidency, no New Deal. Someone else entirely steers the United States through the Great Depression and the Second World War. The entire architecture of the 20th century, rerouted by one piece of discount furniture and one woman's reflexes. Historians write dissertations about vast economic forces and great men. Nobody writes dissertations about the chair. That, frankly, is an oversight this channel intends to correct. April 1961. The CIA has a plan to topple Fidel Castro, land a brigade of Cuban exiles at the Bay of Pigs, spark an uprising, and let the regime collapse on cue. By day 3, the invasion is drowning on the beach, ammunition is gone, and Washington approves one last desperate move. Unmarked jets from the aircraft carrier Essex will fly cover for the exiles' B-26 bombers coming up from Nicaragua. Simple, coordinated, timed to the minute. And the minute is where it gets beautiful. Nicaragua ran on Central Time. Cuba ran on Eastern. somewhere between the carrier, the airfield, and multiple layers of professionals whose entire job description was details. Nobody reconciled the 1 hour difference. The bombers and their fighter escort arrived over the beach exactly 60 minutes apart. Both punctual, both professional, both completely alone. It's the kind of scheduling error a coffee shop survives. A covert invasion, less so. The unescorted B-26S flew straight into Castro's Air Force. Slow, lumbering bombers with no fighters anywhere in sight, arriving over a fully alerted enemy in broad daylight. 2 were shot down. 4 American airmen died over a beach their country was officially not involved with. Within hours, the invasion collapsed. Castro banked the propaganda win of the decade, and some 1,200 exiles marched into Cuban prisons. In Washington, a very new President Kennedy learned exactly what the word deniability is worth when your fingerprints are on the wristwatch. But the real punchline came later. A rattled Castro sprinted into the arms of the Soviet Union and Khrushchev, reasoning that the Americans might try again with feeling. Decided Cuba needed protection of the thermonuclear variety. 18 months later, the world got the Cuban Missile Crisis. The bear, the submarine, all of it. Pull the thread backwards, and it ends at a wristwatch. Empires have fallen to armies, plagues, and ideas. This one nearly fell to a puzzle that every airline intern solves before lunch. November 8th, 1939. Munich. For over a year, a quiet carpenter named Georg Elser has been preparing for this exact evening, working entirely alone. No organization, no funding, no accomplices. He spent more than 30 nights hidden inside the Burgerbruckler beer hall, hollowing out a stone pillar behind the speaker's podium crumb by crumb and fitting a homemade time bomb inside it. His target, Adolf Hitler, who spoke there every November 8th. Same stage, same schedule, with the punctuality of a cuckoo clock. As engineering, the plan was flawless. As reconnaissance, flawless. Elser had accounted for everything on Earth. His problem arrived from slightly above it. That morning, fog rolled over Munich. Hitler's flight back to Berlin was canceled, and his staff moved him onto a special train, which meant the speech had to start earlier and run shorter. Instead of droning on toward 10 o'clock as usual, Hitler wrapped up at 9:07 p.m., skipped his customary round of beer hall mingling, and hurried to the station. The bomb detonated at 9:20. 13 minutes. Not a security sweep, not an informant, not a suspicious guard. A margin thinner than a sitcom episode's cold open. The pillar burst exactly as designed. The ceiling came down precisely where the podium stood. 8 people were killed and more than 60 injured. And the one man the entire machine was built for sat on a train, reading the news from a telegram and concluding that Providence itself had personally intervened on his behalf, which, for the tens of millions still on his schedule, is the darkest possible reading of the evening. Elser was caught at the Swiss border that same night, carrying enough evidence to convict him twice. He spent the war as a special prisoner and was executed at Dachau in April 1945, weeks before the end. Here's the part that stings. The most competent one-man assassination attempt of the century was defeated not by the Gestapo, not by bodyguards, but by humidity. 50 million deaths still lay ahead, and the weather picked a side. Late 13th century. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, emperor of China, ruler of the largest empire the planet had ever produced, sends Japan a letter that boils down to join us, or else Japan leaves him on red. So in 1274, the Khan launches up to 900 ships and 40,000 men across the strait. The samurai are outnumbered and outgunned. The Mongols brought gunpowder bombs and massed cavalry tactics. Japan brought swords and an honor code. By any sober military arithmetic, Japan is finished. Then, overnight, a typhoon slams into the fleet anchored in Hakata Bay. A third of the ships go to the bottom. Roughly 13,000 men drown without a proper battle. The armada limps home. Now, a reasonable man takes the hint. Kublai Khan was not a reasonable man. He was a Khan. In 1281, he returned with the largest naval invasion force the world would see until D-Day, around 4,400 ships and as many as 140,000 soldiers, a fleet so vast it took 2 conquered nations to build it. The samurai dug in behind stone walls and held the beaches for weeks. And then, On August 15th, the sky delivered a rerun. A second, even bigger typhoon dropped onto the fleet like a piano from the heavens. At least half the invasion force drowned. Of thousands of ships, a few hundred crawled home. Same bay, same enemy, same weather. Getting wrecked by a freak typhoon once is bad luck. Scheduling your rematch in the same bay during typhoon season. That's not fate, that's a performance review. The Japanese drew the obvious conclusion. The gods were on their side, and named the storm's kamikaze, the divine wind, a word with a long and much darker career ahead of it. And here's the twist for the skeptics in the audience. In 2014, geologists drilling sediment cores near Hakata Bay found the actual storm deposits, dated squarely to 1274 and 1281. The legend that shaped a nation's identity for 7 centuries turned out to be, of all things, true. Japan was never conquered, and meteorology, to this day, remains undefeated at home. July 20th, 1944. The Wolf's Lair, East Prussia. Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg walks into Hitler's daily briefing, carrying a briefcase packed with plastic explosive on a running fuse, parks it 2 meters from the Führer, excuses himself for a phone call, and steps outside to wait. The plan is sound. The bomb works. And history is about to be decided by air conditioning and furniture placement. Coincidence number 1. The briefing should have been held in the Führer bunker, a sealed concrete box where the blast wave would have ricocheted around like a racquetball and killed every man in the room. No exceptions, no luck involved. But July 20th was viciously hot. Concrete doesn't breathe, and so the meeting was moved to a light wooden barrack with windows, open ones. In demolition terms, they swapped a pressure cooker for a paper bag. Coincidence number 2. Colonel Heinz Brandt, leaning over the map table, found a stranger's briefcase knocking against his feet. Wanting a clearer view of the Eastern Front, he did the tidy thing. Picked it up and set it down on the far side of a massive oak table support. Just housekeeping. At 12:42, the bomb went off. 4 men died, Brandt among them. He had unknowingly repositioned the instrument of his own death. The oak slabs swallowed the blast. Meant for Hitler, who walked out with shredded trousers, a perforated eardrum, and a now unshakable conviction that destiny was his personal bodyguard. That afternoon, he was showing Mussolini the smoking ruins like a proud homeowner mid-renovation. What followed was anything but funny. Roughly 5,000 people executed in the purge. The German resistance annihilated root and branch, and 9 more months of a war that was already lost. Every one of those deaths balanced, that day, on a heat wave and a single piece of furniture doing its job slightly too well. If the 20th century ever gets a museum, that oak table support deserves its own climate-controlled wing. The irony of the climate control comes included, free of charge. Late 1863 or early 1864. Witnesses never pinned down the date. On a packed railway platform in Jersey City. A young man is buying a sleeping car berth when the crowd surges. The train lurches into motion, and he's twisted off his feet, dropping into the gap between the platform and the moving car, which is precisely when a stranger's hand shoots out, seizes him by the coat collar, and hauls him back onto solid ground in one clean pull. The young man turns to thank his rescuer and freezes. He knows that face. All of America knew that face. It belongs to Edwin Booth, the most celebrated actor of his generation, the Shakespearean megastar of the age. The rescued party needs no playbill either, though his fame is inherited. Robert Todd Lincoln, eldest son of the sitting president of the United States. Booth had no idea whose life he'd just saved. He learned it months afterward in a letter from a friend on General Grant's staff, and by all accounts was quietly delighted. A charming anecdote, the kind you dine out on for years. Right up until April 1865, when Edwin's younger brother, John Wilkes Booth, walked into Ford's Theater and shot Robert's father in the back of the head. Sit with that arithmetic for a second. One Booth pulls a Lincoln out from under a train, another Booth puts a bullet in a Lincoln roughly a year later. Edwin, a staunch Union man, reportedly shattered by his brother's crime, is said to have clung to the memory of that platform as one of the few consolations of his later life. Fate keeps a meticulous ledger. It just has a vicious sense of humor about the entries. And no, you couldn't pitch this to Hollywood. The studio notes would say too implausible. One family can't be on both sides of the same presidency. History disagrees. By the way, Robert Todd Lincoln went on to be personally present or nearby at two more presidential assassinations, Garfield's and McKinley's, after which he reportedly began declining presidential invitations. Wise man. January 1917. Germany is about to relaunch unrestricted submarine warfare and knows perfectly well this might drag the United States into the war. So Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann drafts an insurance policy, a top-secret telegram to Mexico proposing an alliance. If America joins the war, Mexico attacks from the south and collects Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona as a prize. Diplomatic dynamite sealed with Germany's finest ciphers. One logistical hiccup. Britain had fished up and cut Germany's transatlantic cables in the first days of the war. So Berlin routed its most explosive secret through neutral channels, including, magnificently, a diplomatic cable line that the United States itself had lent Germany to facilitate peace talks. And every one of those routes physically passed through relay stations under British eyes. Germany, in effect, mailed its plan to carve up America via America through Britain's post office. You could not write this into fiction. An editor would send it back. Enter Room 40, British Naval Intelligence's code-breaking den, which, thanks to an earlier chain of accidents, could read German traffic. Back in 1914, the Russians had pulled a codebook from the wrecked German cruiser Magdeburg and handed a copy to London. The telegram was duly decrypted. After some theatrical laundering to conceal the source, Britain handed President Wilson the receipts in late February 1917. The American press detonated. Skeptics cried British forgery. A perfectly reasonable suspicion, right up until Zimmermann himself stood at a press conference and confirmed he'd sent it. Historians still argue about why. Unforced error doesn't begin to cover it. It remains the only entry on tonight's list where the punchline delivered itself, in person, on the record. Weeks later, the United States declared war. Fresh American divisions tipped the Western Front, and the German Empire's obituary was co-written by its own foreign minister, a man who somehow lost a war by telegram, twice, once by sending it, once by confirming it. So that's what history hangs on. Toilets, benches, table legs, and one hungry bear. Sleep tight. If this made you trust the universe a little less, subscribe. Dumb Luck uploads weekly around here. And drop a comment voting for the MVP of Blind Chance. My money's on the bear. It never even knew it was playing.